NRR Sports Show. This is episode 781. I'm joined by a really special guest. His name is Marc Sessler. You can find him on the NFL Network. They have a show called Around the NFL alongside with Dan and Greg Rosenthal and Dan Hansis. Is it? I don't like to butcher names, but
Hansis, yeah.
Hansis, yeah. So man, they do a great job with their shows, and they have a podcast out there. Everyone go check it out. And I just want to say thank you, Marc, for joining the show. It's truly an honor to have you on, talk some NFL. Obviously, the off season is still going on, but mini camps is starting soon. But first of all, how are you and your family doing so far?
Oh, we're doing all right. We thankfully our kids are back at school. In fact, they're just about to rush in the door in about 5 minutes. Hopefully, that won't cause total chaos. But they're only going for about 2 hours a day, so it's not as if mom and dad are back in normal worlds. But we're getting by like everyone else. But California's starting to open up a lot, and that's been great.
So for you, I want to start off with your childhood, and for you, when you were growing up, when did you realize that this could be something a passion about for your career and being in the sports industry? When did you start realizing that, and who did you look up to in the sports industry while working on your craft?
Yeah, sure. There just weren't that many opportunities the way there are today. When I was young, there weren't as many people in sports media, and I became obsessed with football in the 80s, the mid 80s. And so for me, I found myself like falling in love with football, but watching guys like Ahmad Rashad and Bob Costas, in their studio work, and amazing play-by-play guys like Dick Enberg and that whole crew from back then, Bob Trumpy, Don Crickey, and just thinking like they live in this world that I love already. How did they get there? I know I want to do this. And I was really lucky that in middle school, we actually had, they had like a video department where I had a good friend named Chris Sprague who came in he moved in from Cleveland, and two things. He made me a Browns fan in sixth grade. And then he also was very into announcing and video projects. So we did that in middle school together. Then in high school, we actually had a cable television station. I mean, this was essentially for nerds, but we were like, we're taking this thing over. And so, year by year, we did more and more work. We announced football games. We did basketball games live. And we did everything we could in the off season when there were sports. We did music shows, cooking shows. And I just was like, this is like, I was walking around with like a Bob Costas card in my wallet and thinking to myself, this is just what I want to do. I'm so immersed in it. Like schoolwork was always sort of secondary to it. And there was chances to work at our weekly newspaper. And I became like later in high school, I played football and then realized this is taking me nowhere, because there are not a lot of spots for a slow man who's 5'7" as football becomes more serious. So the reporting, the announcing, and writing, being able to write for football really opened up doorways. And one thing I always think about is encouragement, that there was, you're just learning to write. And I wrote these absurdly overly long articles because I didn't even know how to start or finish them. There was a dad that like yanked his car over to the side of the road once. And he said, look, I know you're just starting, but I like your writing, and I see how passionate you are, like keep going. And it's crazy how one little thing like that, I still think about that. And so, there are so many people younger today asking like, can you look at this or read that? And I try to when I can, because there were a couple people who always, went out of their way to give positive and honest feedback. And it helps a lot. So, it started there. There was a really circuitous route to where I got to today, but that's how it started.
So for you in high school and college, did you get to like cover any high school games and college games while you were at the schools?
Yeah. So high school, like that TV station I mentioned, like we kind of just did everything. The first thing I ever announced was a gymnastics meet that was like 4 hours long, and there was like silence in the stands, and we had a camera up on a tripod, and it came crashing down at one point, blew up this girl's routine. But on top of it, the show was a disaster because I didn't never really watch gymnastics. So, you're just sitting there saying that girl did a very nice thing right there. That was a nice spin move by her. And there was one injured gymnastics performer that was sort of sitting near us, and she's like, you guys are very far away from describing what's really happening here. But anyways, like wherever I went, I tried to cover sports. But when I got to college, I really more wanted just to become a writer. And, you know, like any sort of pie in the sky young person thinking I wanted to write a novel. And I got away from sports for a really long time. And I kind of walked away from journalism and didn't really come back to it until I moved to LA and had a friend that suggested me for like a low-level 3-day a week editor's job at NFL.com. And the editor, Justin Hathaway, he was like, look, I know you haven't done this in a long time. I'm going to take a chance on you. And had he not, I probably would just be working in corporate America where I had been at that point. So I'm really thankful for him too.
So before we go any further, we have we have a 14-year-old kid that's part of the team. What do you think? Obviously, for him has been a tough road when it comes to going into stadiums or whatever. But for you, is it time to see like kids like to see kids on national TV reporting on the sidelines for games? Do you think it's time for kids to come up now?
Well, you know that the what was it? They had the games broadcast on, why am I not remembering the name of the station? The kids station, Nickelodeon. And it was, you know, like in our house, our kids are kind of used to watching football as is, but I thought they did a wonderful job. And there are ways and opportunities. And look at, like, if he's on your team and he's doing stuff with you, that's sort of what I'm saying, that when I was 14, like I found some stuff at our school, but in terms of like getting into an area where you're on a podcast and talking about NFL football, like it just, the doors were not there. And I think they are now. I think that you can be young and on Twitter and you're offering your opinion, interacting. Like the idea that when I was that age, to be able to, you know, write to Browns players on Twitter and have them respond back, I would have just simply fainted in my room. So I think there's just so much more access and availability. And at a younger age, you can make a much more of an impact. You know, it's not like you funnel 7,000 people who want to do this down to 10 who get to do it at a national level. It's kind of like the funnel now is sort of different. Now, not everyone's going to go work for like CBS Sports or something, but I'm not sure that matters as much. And the landscape is so different that 10 years from now, the whole idea that we're watching stuff on television at all. I mean, I look at my own kids, they don't understand why anything has commercials, because they're just used to stuff being fed to you instantly. So the landscape is always changing. And I think everything is opening up for so many more people. And that's great. That's great. That doesn't mean everyone, you know, will find out they want to do it, but you can explore it in such a way that you couldn't before.
Yeah. So I'll send you his page. You can check it out. He does some great stuff. He's done over 1,500 star interviews, and this 14-year-old kid, and he was covering the NFL draft this year too.
I mean, I think he should be giving the advice if he sounds like he's grinding at a level that I wouldn't be comfortable with it myself at this point. So,
yeah. But so I want to ask you though, how did this come about with NFL Network? And obviously you guys have a show called Around the NFL, but first, take me to the process and how you got into the NFL Network, and how grateful are you to have this type of job at NFL Network?
Well, I'm very grateful. And one reason is that, like I mentioned, there was this sort of 10 to 15 year space where I wasn't in sports, and I thought I wanted to do other things. And I learned through about 15 to 20 terrible jobs how it felt to not be plugged into your passion. Yeah. So when this opportunity came to become an editor at NFL.com, I hadn't worked in news really going back to college. And so I just bought books on writing news, which is completely different than the kind I wanted to do screenwriting and stuff. I mean, journalism and writing breaking news for NFL.com I was lucky I didn't get fired. I remember the first couple of days walking outside for lunch thinking, I have no idea what I'm doing. And we had just had a child. I was freaking out, but you know, my editor just said, it's reps. And so after a couple of months, you start to feel a little more comfortable. You get your sea legs under you. And like, for me, I just started I worked when I wasn't working. I would go home and be like, this news broke, sit down on your keyboard and write what you would write, and then go see what they wrote and see how close it is. And it was a good way to find out what I was missing, where I was placing stuff. I mean, that's just stuff that other people are learning in journalism school that I had to learn as a 36-year-old feeling like a total fool. But, you know, to the reps point, Dan Hansis got hired with much more like basic skills than I had. I mean, he's a really good writer right out of the chute. A month after I did, he showed up. And so we kind of became friends because he had taken a big chance. He had moved from the East Coast to Los Angeles to take that job. And, we hung out socially and we had shared dreams. And that was at a time where, podcasts existed, but they didn't really exist that much at NFL.com. And so we started this little tiny one called the Debate Club. And again, it's people helping you out, because Dave Damashek, one of the greats, befriended us. He'd have us on our show a few times, and he put our little 10-minute debate club on the back of his show, which was by far the most listened to podcast at NFL Network. So, it's had that not happened, I don't know what would have gone on. But then Greg Rosenthal came, and then he hired Chris Wessling, and the four of us, in time, we kind of clicked. I think the thing is that each of us took a very circuitous route to get there. We were writers, and so we were grinding and writing all day long. And so we were really dug in with the news, but we each had very different personalities, different backgrounds. It wasn't like four people that came out of the same journalism school or something. So, long story short, 1,300 episodes later, we just are who we are. We're not trying to be someone else. And we're genuinely friends. Through so much, of course we lost Chris Wessling, our friend. And I think that, if anything, that's brought our whole community just even closer together. So it's a journey that I look back on, and I'm like, I wouldn't know how to tell someone else to navigate all that, other than the fact that, when I didn't feel that my skills were up to snuff, it was like, I'm going to work in the hours deep into the night to get better.
Yeah. So, the things I love about your show is you guys bring a different dynamic for each of you. And that's how you, like I said, your show is one of the best on NFL Network, and people are watching it, and you guys bring a different dynamic. And speaking of Chris Wessling, rest in peace. And that was a tragic thing. And I just want to ask you about, what was it like working with him? Can you speak on the legacy of Chris? And his wife is really inspiring. They have an inspiring story. They have a kid now, and unfortunately, the kid won't see the father. But how was it working with him and the legacy that he made on NFL Network?
Well, it's one thing that I think we learned when he passed, and that was right before the Super Bowl. And we were crushed. Just utterly crushed. But everyone that knew Chris had a different type of friendship with him, and he really changed, I thought, and by that I mean evolved and grew as a person from when he came to Los Angeles to the end. And I think Lakeisha changed his life and saved his life when he went through his first battle with cancer. And Link is such a blessing. Like, you can see him in Link's eyes. You can see Chris, and we just saw him this past weekend. And what I would say about him is that I love what Dan Hans has said. He thinks that Chris is maybe the biggest sports fan in America. Researcher. He was something that I learned from him, because again, I'd come in always kind of questioning if I had like the knowledge and the skills after leaving sports for a while. I learned from him because he would get on to a point. He was so passionate and sure about his point that you started to listen to him every time he spoke. And something that I felt about him was like, when I would make a football point and he would agree with me, I'd be thinking that is a grand slam moment, because, if he agrees, then you've done something right. Your work and what you're seeing is getting closer to the truth. Because I also think you could sit and watch a football game with him, and he would see something about the speed of a running back, about the way a quarterback's mechanics might be a little off. And he just saw things that I don't think there are that many tape watchers in the country that had his sort of innate skill. And that came from him watching sports his whole life with his other six brothers. It was like, I think he came out of a factory where you're just bathed in sports all day long. His passion, his compassion for other people. He loved having big parties. And when he showed up in LA, I think that was when our friendship really took off, because, I could tell, from his own words, that he was a fish out of water and he needed people to hang out with. And I was like, we're not letting him leave LA. And so he and I spent a lot of time going out for beers together. And, I probably, to the annoyance of my family situation at times, but I look back and I'm like, he's one of the best friends I've ever had. And I'm so thankful for every little moment that we had. You can still hear his laugh. He's just an unmistakable, there's no one like him. And it's easy to maybe think you say that about almost anyone, but he genuinely stands out as one of the most unique figures and friends I'll ever have.
Yes, actually, I'll tell you a quick story. I was messaging him back. We were messaging back and forth for him about coming on the show. But unfortunately, it was during his recovery process of the cancer, and he said he couldn't. He told me that he couldn't talk right now. He's busy with the radiation, and I was hoping that we can get him on. Unfortunately, a terrible situation, and I will never forget. I think my memory will be just texting him, and then going back and forth. So I think that's one of the memories. And
he was one of the most generous people out there with writing to listeners, sharing, interacting with listeners. Not everyone chooses to do that, and that's fine. But like I've heard from so many people saying like they had these incredible back and forths with Chris, and I'm not surprised at all.
Yeah. So for you, obviously, all of us went through a tough time last year with the pandemic, and we're still going through the pandemic. So for you as a team and yourself, what have you learned as a podcast host and a reporter? Obviously, you have to utilize different things with Zooms and other stuff, and working from home. What have you guys learned from the past year till now?
That's a good question, because I think it mixes the professional with like your own home life. I've learned that I'm not very patient on the home front, but in terms of work, we're really lucky that we have a producer, Erica Tamposi, who when this thing started, I think, TV stations and networks in general were scrambling to figure out how to get their shows out. And within 24 hours, she had to set us up with mics. She had a platform for us to record on. And we just started doing shows every day because you couldn't go anywhere. I mean, like it was like actually the only little bit of sunshine that seemed to shine through. I look back on some of those early pandemic shows, and we called them bunker casts because we were all in our own places, and you just didn't know what the future was. And so it was a little bit maybe of a way to escape reality. And I think that, a lot of our listeners said kind of, thanks for doing that. You could have gone off the map and we totally would have gotten that. And it's like, I say thanks in reverse, because like the fact that they wanted that and the fact that it was making it happy, it was a delightful little thing to each see each other and talk and like kind of be separated from all the other drama. So I kind of learned like I guess for me, like flexibility, having someone like our producer who was so nimble, and the fact that like other shows were coming to her. How did you do that? Why are how are these guys back on the air? But also like we don't have enough time to work with people you don't like. And I think that, you take any job you can get and you move up. But if you have a chance to like really work with people that you're friends with and you admire, you're really, really lucky. And so I think I've learned to feel lucky about that situation, because that's not like so many other jobs I had in other places in other times in life.
So what's it like? Obviously, you guys have you guys have a show pretty much like every day on the NFL Network, and so what's it like working on around the NFL and working with Dan and Greg and having weekly guests on, and what's that been like for you?
Well, I feel it's a job where it's never the same, and like you learn about I think just the chemistry of talking with each other. I think Dan and Greg and I, and this was certainly true of all four of us with Wes, that you kind of knew when someone was going to talk next sometimes, especially when we were together in that studio. You just could look in each other's eyes and see what was happening. But even in this situation now, I think there's this sort of the way it is with your friends, when someone, you can tell someone's in a bad mood and they're going to go off on something, or when they're really, feeling good. And there's days where we've been really tired. And I think there's been days when we're good, the shows reflects that. But having guests has been so much more important to us during the pandemic. We really weren't much of a guest type show. We certainly don't really ever have players on or coaches. We do more of that. And I think that we've heard a little feedback, especially from some coaches, like, hey, that was a little different than going on show X, like, thanks. And we try to like make it fun for them and a little bit different. I like just to see other sides of their personality, but really, I think like our meat and potatoes is our guests, guys like Steve Weish, like Patrick Claybon, Colleen Wolfe, and so many people that I could mention, and so many people from, who cover teams remotely. You just learn from them. And when we have a guest who comes on that really fits, I think we're always thinking to ourselves, because we're constantly on these text threads, like, we're bringing her back again. We're bringing him back again. So we have like a cluster of like real friends of the show. And then we have like, we're trying to build out a reporter or two for each team that we can have an interesting discussion with. I think of Seth Payne, who came on. He's attached to the Texans, and he'll just come on with fire. And it's like, we love talking to these people. So I feel really, it makes me excited and energized to start to kind of expand and to know more and more people inside the business. Like, it's a small community in a way, but there's some really special people that stand out, and we've had a lot of them on our show, and it brings life. And we have listeners that say, we love that guest, do it again. And when we hear that, we will.
Yeah, same thing with our show. Pretty much the same thing. Like, we have the same dynamic, and obviously they have busy schedules right now. I've been doing the show on myself lately for the past 5 weeks because my team has been busy. And but when we learn something new every day when it comes to when we have these guests on. For me and for us, it doesn't mean about the fame. It matters where they came from, how they got there, and how hard they worked, and that's what matters to us. And this is why our show is amazing too. And I love learning about you guys' stories and how you guys made it here now.
Absolutely,
it's amazing. But for you, before we get to the fun stuff, I want to ask you, what do you guys have coming up this week or the next few weeks with your shows? And obviously, I think this week you're on every day, right? Pretty much.
So we actually right now have 2 audio shows. They come out on YouTube too, but we have a Friday network show, and that is sort of, I think we're trying to still just explore what we can do with that. And we're having as much fun as we can. And we pull a little bit from our audio shows, because I think that's really who we are. And they've been really good about mixing, the content from what we do. Last week, we went around the AFC and around the NFC. And dug in on each team. Those were 2 shows. I think it's some of our best shows. Those were shows that Wes was incredible at too. So we miss him, but we try to honor him with it too. And then I also would point to, like, the schedule release, for instance, is Wednesday. So the NFL is like, they seem a little resistant to create anything resembling a real break or an off season. So there's always stuff to go from, and you go through free agency, then the draft, then the schedule release, then mini camps, and then it builds up. And so, it seems to be, I think it's a good thing. Like, even a mid-range news story in the NFL is bigger news than almost all the other sports. So it's just like, we're lucky to be in an environment where it's as big as it is. It's not fading, it's only growing. And so we're attached to something that I think that is continue to climb.
Yeah, you guys break it down. That's what I love. You guys talk about everything. And but I want to get to this NFL free agency and get your thoughts. And obviously, it's a crazy one, and the biggest news out there is Aaron Rodgers. But what are your thoughts on Aaron Rodgers, and what do you think his mindset is? And I don't know. Like, for me, he's making I think he all he wants is about the fame. But for you, what are your thoughts about all this situation coming up?
I think he's a different type of person. And Aaron Rodgers, I don't know him obviously at all. So it's like, I feel uncomfortable speculating about what he is like, but you just hear that he's, I think in a good way, a complex thinker. He's got a lot of interests outside of football. I think his legacy matters to him. And, we're in a time now where, quarterbacks are much more interested in choosing their own adventure. It's not just, hey, you signed this contract, and if the team is falling off a cliff, it's like, no, I want to build my own legacy. And I just look back to what Tom Brady did over the last calendar year, and I think it changed the way that many quarterbacks feel about their own empowerment. And we heard from Russell Wilson, the Deshaun Watson thing before that took a very bizarre turn and an unfortunate one. And now it's Aaron Rodgers. And I think Aaron Rodgers does not want to be perceived by Packers fans as a diva or annoying. And I think that's why you've heard him speak through some other people, various things. But I also think the Packers are run a little differently. They don't have a clear-cut owner because of the way that their structure is. And I do think that, the drafting of Jordan Love, motivated him. Not that he needed motivation, but it certainly, the results were an MVP. But I don't think that's something that's healed at all. I think he sort of said all along, and I just would go by his own words when he went on Kyle Brandt's show, even weeks after they drafted Jordan Love, that, you can see an end of the road, that these things typically don't end well anyways. And so to me, it's the stalemate where, the Packers technically hold the leverage. but that doesn't always mean that they're going to get their way here. And so do I think that there's a chance that he could wind up with the Denver Broncos? I definitely do. I mean, I think that's just because we're hearing about there's more and more momentum to that. I mean, the package in return would need to be huge, because if you're Brian Gutekunst, if you're the Packers in general, you've got that all over your reputation, and it's going to be it's the biggest story of the year. To me, like, I kind of just want it to be over. I want to find out where he goes, because, you got his old teammates saying it's not about this or that, but then you hear other reports that are totally different, and it's kind of just like hang on to your hats because it's not over yet.
Yeah, but actually, I'm having Thursday. I'm having Greg Null, a former Packers quarterback. He's coming on the show Thursday, and he was in the same locker room as him. So I'll get more insight from Greg.
Yeah,
to see what he thinks about it. But for you, but isn't it fun for you guys just to cover this type of story? It must be fun for you guys on the NFL Network table and all the other people that work there. And but at the end of the day, where do you think he ends up, though?
I would think Denver.
Denver.
Or let me put this: I would say not Green Bay, because I'll pick Denver just because they're the obvious candidate right now. It isn't like there are as many teams that need quarterbacks, but I would imagine like that half the league would be interested, more than half. I mean, all but 4 or 5 teams would view Aaron Rodgers as better than what they have. But if you get caught pursuing him, you suddenly have a brouhaha to deal with inside your own locker room, your own roster. But today the odds would say Denver. I'm hearing, you're hearing his comments over the course of a year talking about leaving Green Bay, not like, hey, this is what we're going to do for the next 5 or 6 years. And maybe, when relationships are damaged, or if there's a lack of trust, it's hard to repair that.
Mm-hmm. So who are some of your winners and losers in this year's free agency class?
Well, I'd pack the draft into it, and I'd look at a team like the Jets. I think that they, part of it is, the coaching, hiring, and firing cycle. I think Robert Saleh is going to be awesome. Mike LaFleur, who I've talked about on a show like ad nauseum, who comes from a Shanahan system, I think is perfect for a post Adam Gase rebuild with Zach Wilson. I really liked what they did in the draft, and I think that they've been aggressive. And for me, they needed to improve their offensive line to get Elijah Vera Tucker where they did. Widely seen as arguably the best interior lineman in the draft. Elijah Moore, you start to pair, you think about him and Denzel Mims. I mean, Zach Wilson is just going to be, from a scheme angle, coaching angle, and what's around him, in a much better position than Sam Darnold was. But then I'll throw a loser your way. I think it's, I really have high hopes for the Carolina Panthers, and I love Matt Rule, and I think they're going to build a great team. But they went into the year chasing Matthew Stafford, making it clear Teddy Bridgewater was not their guy. There were whispers of, potentially Deshaun Watson if that thing had gone differently. Like, the owner was heat-seeking a legit starting quarterback. And you are now with Sam Darnold, and they passed up Justin Fields in the draft, and Mac Jones. And I don't have a problem with maybe not taking Mac Jones where they were, but they're going to be looked at as like, there are a couple teams out there that did not take Justin Fields,
right? And
he slipped to Chicago, who moved up for him, right? But like, if he becomes the next Deshaun Watson or Patrick Mahomes, then you're one of those teams that's talked about negatively for a while. So I think they went in with high hopes to this offseason, and maybe Sam Darnold, who's in a much better situation, will thrive. And then you'd be like, look, you know what? This worked out too. But I mean, Sam Darnold to me is a complete wild card based on what we've seen.
Yeah. Speaking of Darnold, I see there was a picture of you and him somewhere. And what was he like in person?
Well, so I didn't want to bother him too much, but I was at LAX, and it was right before, it's the last NFL event we went to was the Combine 2 Februaries ago, where I was just waiting for my flight. I love getting to airports early. And there was this little coffee counter, and I was sitting there just like having a cup of coffee, and I guess it would be his manager or an agent type person. He came and sat down, and people really didn't notice him. He was also not facing like the whole airport, right, but he was eating like a big plate of like eggs and bacon or something. And when he was about to go, and one of my best friends, Dan Hansis, is like this giant Jets fan. I was thinking like, I have to find a way to talk to Sam Darnold, even though I don't want to be super annoying. So when he was getting up to go, and again, it wasn't like there were people noticing him. I just said, hey, I didn't want to bother you, but like, I work for the NFL. We had this podcast, and my friend Dan and Dan's dad is like this huge Jets fan. And like, could I just take a photo with you real quick? Like, I think they would freak out. And he couldn't have been any cooler. He was super nice. Like, we didn't exchange numbers and plans to go out to dinner or anything. I can promise you that. But I said, thanks. I got out of his way. And like, I was like, yes. Like my thing was like this, you have to like, you just have to go for it in those situations. I mean, I would have been really upset if it had been negative or he's like, get out of my way. Like I would have been like, I'll never not think about that, but he couldn't have been cooler.
That's awesome. So I want to get to, I'm a big Dallas Cowboy fan. And what do you think of their offseason? Obviously, the draft, they were loaded up on defense. Do you think the Cowboys improved themselves to be able to contend in the NFC East?
Well, I think they already are contenders in the NFC East. I mean, even if their defense had remained a steaming pile to some degree, I mean, the way that their offense played last year before Dak went down. So, you solved the Dak thing. Their offense is totally loaded. I kind of think that they put Dan Quinn in a much better position than Mike Nolan was. Like you get Micah Parsons, who looks to be a fascinating player. And, we don't, on our show, we don't do a lot of college football. So I'm just sort of looking at what they did in their attack plan. It reminds me of what the Carolina Panthers did a year ago when they went all defense on draft day through all the rounds. And it's like, so you've given Dan Quinn a lot more to work with. And I would also say that if you look at a lot of the same Cowboys players 2 years ago before the Mike Nolan thing. And I think that one of the reasons that went south was you heard whispers that the players were not operating off of instinct. There was way too much going on, mentally to process. And I think switching schemes is a really tough ask sometimes because, you draft players to play in a certain scheme and they're all kind of flexible at this point. But I think a lot of them just felt out of position. So do you get a better version of Jalen Smith? Do you get a better version of Leighton Vander Esch? I think you do. And then you've added Micah Parsons to the whole situation. And they've rebuilt their secondary to some degree. And it's like if their defense could be, 40% better and their offense remains as fiery as it was last year, you can win that division. There was, before Dak went down, they were averaging like 30 points a game, but they were giving up 32 points a game. And it's like a lot of these NFL defenses are subpar. You're fine with an average defense if you got a great offense in this right now in 2021. But you can't be like the worst defense in the NFL. And they look that way so often and so disorganized that I expect Dan Quinn just to improve that. So I think they've got a great chance. I mean, people are counting out, like, I don't know who you count out in that division. Maybe the Eagles are saying that, but if you look at their roster on offense, it isn't that shaky. It comes down to if Jalen Hurts can do it. I think Washington, they were a playoff team. They've got a great defense. You've got Fitzpatrick. I mean, they're interesting. And, I don't count on anyone there. Like, I really don't. I mean, I think like the Giants, if Daniel Jones can play, look what's around him. So you're not going to get a repeat of last year where they were just the butt of jokes, from September through January.
Do you think Dan Quinn can help us not build the Seattle Seahawks defense, but can he like potentially come close to it?
Well, so I think like the thing about Dan Quinn was like before things went south in Atlanta, that's one coach, like this doesn't happen often, but like during a Seahawks Super Bowl week before he got hired, there was just a chance, this one kind of like interview session with all the coaches and players where there weren't that many people around him because it was later in the week and everyone had gotten their Dan Quinn stories out of the way. And I just sat and talked to him with like 4 or 5 other people and just listened to him describe what they were going to do to Peyton Manning. And he was absolutely right. Like all the players were saying, we are going to make life impossible for Peyton Manning. And you knew from the first snap of that Super Bowl that their plan worked. And I think that that's the Dan Quinn you have hope in, that he was a good game planner. Players loved him. I think he is a super loyal, high intelligent guy. And a lot of those guys go and become a head coach. I mean, got them to the Super Bowl, the worst result ever happened, obviously 28-3 to lose that game. But then I think the thing is they stopped kind of developing players. That was one year when they went to the Super Bowl where I remember thinking like, we were talking about Dan Quinn is this guy that was really developing defensive players, and it all stopped. And that defense never really became what anyone hoped. So does it help to go from head coach where you got to do 55 other things to go back to coordinator level, get the help they got in this draft, have a scheme that players are invested in, that they know. They'll talk to other players and they'll say, look, Dan Quinn can do it. So I think that it's arrow up. And I guess I've been a Dan Quinn guy, and I can look past some of the stuff that happened in Atlanta.
So do you have time? So we usually do this fun little segment on the show called the rapid fire segment. Do you have time for a quick rapid fire segment?
Oh yeah.
All right. So obviously Wednesday's a schedule release. So what are you guys most looking forward to when that comes out? And all my friends are saying that Buccaneers and the Patriots game should be on Thanksgiving.
Well, I love that idea, first of all, because they're not going to get the kickoff because it's in New England.
Yeah.
I think that, we were talking about this on our show today. What would be the kickoff? Because you look at who the Buccaneers' home opponents are, and there's the Cowboys. That could be Thanksgiving. That feels like something they do, but maybe Bills, Buccaneers in Tampa Bay to open the season. So when the schedule comes out, something I like to look at is like, obviously, like all the primetime games, all the Thanksgiving stuff like that. But I kind of like to look at teams that get stuck. There's always 3 or 4 teams a year. And this is like an article that I typically tend to write for our site, is like toughest schedules and stuff. And it's like, there's always a couple teams that get totally screwed with like 4 straight road games, or like 2 road games, a bye, and then 2 road games. And it's like, are they the type of team to get through that? Even the Bucs last year, I thought, had such a late bye, and that can help or hurt you. And they all said that it helped. That bye week coming when it did, they didn't lose again after that. And they didn't score under 30 points again. They came out and scored 26 points. But then after that, in the next 6-7 games up to the Super Bowl, they were unstoppable. So I kind of look at placements of buys, who has a really rough situation out of the gate, because we know everyone's opponents, but like there are teams that really get the shaft, and others that you look at the way that their season closes, they might be home 3 of 4, and they might be home. They're going to be home 3 of 4 against division opponents. That stuff stands out to me. But a lot of the schedule, to me in April, it's like, I get why we're making a huge deal out of it, but it looks like hogwash by November. Teams that you thought would be this aren't. And so it's kind of just a guessing game.
What was your guys' most memorable Chris Weising memory?
Well, just for me, it's just, I think of all the work stuff we did and the funny moments and his laugh. But for me, it's, the moments that I spent with him one-on-one or as a group, socially. He was just an incredible storyteller. And when you get a few beers into him and into yourself, like, you were in a whole different world and you never knew what was going to happen. So he was an unpredictable, and in all the best ways, enjoyable friend. And it would be hard to me to pick one, because it's like I could easily pick my top 100.
So for you, out of the 3 of you, Dan, and Greg, who's the most competitive?
Wow, I would say not. I don't think me in the technical ways that you'd think, but maybe each in our own ways. That's a tough one, because I think we're all, to be honest, I think we're all very competitive. First of all, like, we could have done a show that went on, look at your own show. You're doing these all the time. It's like, we could have done a show that was once a week. Yeah. We could have done a show that didn't start on Sunday nights and go to like 9:30 at night. There were a lot of ways to take the foot off the pedal. We could have not written 10,000 stories when we were trying to get like our brand up and running on NFL.com, but we all chose to do all those things. And so I wouldn't poke at anyone as less competitive, but I think we're all very different. Like, and it makes us friends too. Like, Greg and I are completely different probably in how we would deal with work and management and strategy, but I'd let him speak to that. Like, I think I'm a little bit sometimes, I can have the wool pulled over my eyes a little bit, but I think we're all very, very competitive.
So who's the funniest person on NFL Network?
I think Dan Hansis is the funniest. When Sheck was there, Sheck in our newsroom would I'd stay sometimes just later in the day just to hear him go on and on about stuff. He was incredible. But just being on our show with Dan, some of the stuff that he comes up with, his voices, I don't think there are a lot of funny men necessarily, covering sports, but like he makes me laugh every show.
Are you surprised that KJ Wright is still a free agent?
Well, I guess all these veterans that will get picked up. I think a lot of it was like teams seeing what happened in the draft. A guy like Richard Sherman, he's talked about maybe even going back to Seattle or back to San Francisco. But I think Richard Sherman wouldn't be that surprised. It's like you want to find out where you are And now you'll start seeing these guys get signed.
So for you, favorite food?
Well, I'm kind of vegetarian, so it's like I'm super boring on that front, but my kids eat pizza like literally every day, so I tend to eat a lot of pizza. But I like a good, like really good, go out to a really good Italian meal. I love Indian food. I absolutely love certain. Well, I mean, the rest of it would be to be boring to most people. I would say a great Italian meal with like a bottle of wine or multiple bottles is fantastic.
So, so for you, what are you most looking forward to for this upcoming season? Obviously, they added a 17 game schedule now, and for you guys, what are you just most looking forward to when the season starts?
Well, so from a Browns fan perspective, I want to see how they can follow up what they did last year. I'm just sort of always nervous about that. But I think from more of an NFL angle, like it was a really long year last year. I think for literally everyone involved. And like the idea that like the Buffalo Bills went 13-3 with no fans, like just to kind of like get back to what that looked like. Football is a community thing. It should be played before fans. And while I like the unusual nature of a weird year, I mean, despite all the truly negative stuff, like it was kind of novel to have the NFL go through what it went through. Because like these seasons just sort of run into each other sometimes. But to go back to that, I think is cool. And like I guess for me also, I want to see, we're now ticketing the Buccaneers to maybe just go back to the Super Bowl, and there's always this like ticking clock on Tom Brady, although maybe not, maybe there is no clock inside of him. So I want just like, how can they follow that up?
Yeah. Actually, speaking of your Browns, there should be no excuses now. I think you have one of the most talented rosters out there, in my opinion. Cleveland.
Well, what could go wrong? I'm always waiting for like something, but I do think it's just like something about Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry. I think that what we learned last year, no one had any idea what would happen under Kevin Stefanski in a really weird offseason, no training camp, all this stuff. And they got wiped out in week 1. And I thought, I don't know what's going on here, but they were really resilient. They fought back every time they'd have a loss. They bounced back really well. I think the team totally bought in. So it's not like there's not there used to be the most drama like induced team around in negative ways. And it just was nice to not have that be the case. And so I think that continuity is certainly possible. I hope.
Yeah, like when we did our draft grades after the draft, I gave you Browns an A++++++. You guys nailed everything in the draft.
Well, everyone seemed to give them a high grade. Again, I always worry about that kind of stuff, but they they got high grades last year and they were merited. So I think the draft is like when you have players, you're getting them at value according to where we think about them today. But then I was even today looking at like the draft from 2015 and on Pro Football Reference, and it's like dark green for players that are still active and light green for players that aren't. And it's just kind of excruciating to see what really happens with most of these drafts.
Yeah, and the last two things here before I let you go, our team is part of this foundation called the Hugh Jackson Foundation. He's obviously a former NFL coach with the Browns too, and obviously he's now the offensive coordinator at Tennessee State with Eddie George. So I'll send you that page so you can go check it out. We're helping him prevent human trafficking and making sure the community stays safe and the kids stay safe because it's still horrible out there what I'm seeing from human trafficking. So we need to prevent that. And the last thing here, would you like to say anything to all the nurses, doctors right now, and essential workers?
Well, I mean, obviously, thanks to everything that they do. I mean, as tough as like it seems like our year's been, when you read about like the stress level and I think just the toxic stress and what they've encountered, what none of us saw. I mean, yes, thank you. I mean, because they did something no one else could do, and I have looked into that Hughes Foundation, especially when he started that back when he was the Browns coach, and there aren't many issues more important than that. So that's, I kind of, the one thing I would say for him, for all that happened to him in the NFL, he could have pulled the plug on that or just gone south and moved on, and he didn't. And that says a lot, because that issue, no matter what happens to him coaching wise or any of us, like that thing is like one of the worst things happening. So good for him.
Yeah, and he's going to do some great things at Tennessee State with Eddie George. So it's going to be awesome to see that. But there it is. That wraps up episode 781 with the great Marc Sessler from NFL Network. Go check him out on all social media formats. They have a show called Around the NFL, and they have a great podcast. Man, this was an honor to have you on the show today. And like I said, we would like to have you back as a returning guest so you can meet the full team at some point. But keep up the great work. I'll be watching you guys obviously all the time, and we have to get Greg on the show and Dan. So hopefully that hopefully that happens. But keep up the great work, and you and your family stay safe.
Those guys are expensive. I mean, it was that you said this was a 781st episode. Like, I will come on again. We don't need to wait another 780 unless you may have better options. But at some point I'll come back for sure. So thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem.